Welcome to the November 21st Heartwork and Philosophy Guild uh, meeting. And uh, would let someone like to give the land acknowledgement?
I will.
Go for it.
Thank you. So we acknowledge the land because we center the land in everything. The land was here before we were. The land will be here when we are gone. And we are part of the web of life that exists on the land without any supremacy because of being human, but as being part of a uh, a total a total system of living beings that ranges from microbial beings to beings that walk, hop and slither, fly on this land. We are all part of the same system and connected in ways that we may not even fully understand. And this land has been stewarded for since time immemorial by our indigenous neighbors, colleagues, and uh, living in collective community, stewarding the landscape, and keeping alive the really important parts of this living web, I suppose. Even in the face, as Ben often mentions, in the face of great need and great want and great um, harm from those who have come later to this land. I wish to acknowledge in particular the Sislas Nation, who steward where it is that I live and who have continued to hold the really important aspects of respect and connected life, I guess I would say. And I acknowledge also that each of us comes from lands that are stewarded by different indigenous people. And that's it. Thank you.
All righty. And I am curious. I would like to experiment with a check-in. So if you would close your eyes and bring all of the complex thoughts and emotions that you experience and distill them down to a name of a color that is evocative for you in this moment. I will count to three, and then you will open your eyes. And on my screen, it is April, Ben, and me. And you will start by sharing our color. So 1, 2, 3. Open your eyes. And Ben, what is your color?
You said April 1st.
Oh, April, what is your color?
It's a slaty kind of blue.
Perfect. Over to you, Ben.
I don't have one. I've got a swirl. And it includes a yellow and I guess the dominant color would be yellow, but it's swirled with all sorts of other things mixed in there. Over to you, Roland.
I got teal. And we wanted to try, last time we spoke about the opening, we wanted to try grounding with a North Star item. Was that either an agreement, a primary function, or a responsibility? Yeah.
Yep, that was the idea. Pick one, and we will rotate over time.
Okay. I'm for lists. And at the top of the list is we're all in this together. So then do we talk about that, or how does this supposed to work?
So it's the idea is that rather than trying to cover all of the North Star items like we normally do, we would pick one of them and usually have that opportunity to revisit the North Star. So it could be something like what agreement is rising up for you, or reviewing the agreements and seeing if there's anything that comes from us. That could be a way of treating the agreements, or it could be thinking about or we could each talk about how would we phrase the primary responsibility, the primary function of the guild, and share that way. Or we could do that around what feel like the most important responsibilities. So it's the same kind of idea of we each get a chance to revisit our North Star together, but rather than doing all of them, we just do one more
And
lightly.
how do we pick one?
I would say caretaker pick. It sort of doesn't matter because we're going to rotate it, and it's really just an opportunity for us to kind of touch into the important stuff. So can't
Okay,
get it wrong.
so I'm going to April, would you pick one? Would you feel comfortable doing that?
Am I to pick one of the three possibilities then? Okay, I would pick a primary function. Do you want me to speak to that for myself now?
That sounds like a plan.
So for me, I guess outstanding primary function is around being kind of the vibe watcher, or the vibe having feelers out for what the vibes are as we come together, making decisions, making plans, and so on. And on to Ben, are you next?
That'd be me. Well, and I think it's similar. For me, it really, I'm starting to focus in on Heartwork is about developing and ensuring that the agreements live in all of the, and the agreements that which answer the question, how do we want to work with each other? How do we want to be together? And what do we need to be able to show up? So it feels like the primary responsibility for Heartwork is making sure everyone knows about the agreements, that there's opportunities to discuss them, the oral tradition of keeping the agreements alive and living in the organization. Over to you, Roland.
It's encouraging a term that we have talked about before. I don't know if it's written down, but we don't often use, but of being a spiritual scientist and encouraging the collective, the community, to apply that curiosity to everything that we do together, so that we are not the vibe watchers as ourselves. We may be the primary ones, but everyone then becomes involved in vibe watching and learning, and along the lines of the what Ben was saying about the oral tradition, keeping things fresh and alive and moving. All right. So back to you, April. Do we do another round, or we move on?
I think move on.
We can, and I will say that I've gotten in the habit of doing a double round share so that everyone gets a chance to share and then people get a chance to respond to what they hear. But that is a idiosyncrasy. It's not a requirement. It's just an opportunity, an option. And moving on is a perfectly fine thing.
Okay. So in the email, I indicated that we don't have much on the agenda. So this is an opportunity to be able to put on the agenda anything that we would like to talk about at this meeting. Or if what's already on the agenda is what we want to talk about, to voice that. So over to April.
Well, what I really would like to talk about is the annual report, and have we done it? And I've reviewed what came from our other meetings, but I'm just wondering, have we moved it to where it needs to be moved? Is there anything more to be done around that? And also that brought up then the badge and what a badge system is. I'm starting to get an inkling of it, but I wouldn't mind having a bit more conversation about that. And the other thing that occurred to me, and this is drawing from the notes last time, is our relationship with other guilds as well. We said there might be a way to map that, and that there's some things to take into consideration with that. So I'm wanting to explore that another step anyway, if not come to a conclusion. And over to Ben.
Yeah, that works. We have submitted our annual report. I wrote up our notes from previous meetings, and I think as an agenda item, probably going over that to make sure that we're in agreement that that's our report, to see if there's anything missing. And yeah, I think actually getting into the badges and how we relate to the other guilds, I'm curious I think that part of our, design charrette work this year, all years, is looking at that, but having a conversation in each of the guilds before then would be really useful. So I like that. So I'm going to propose, actually, I'm going to move, oop, that's not what I meant to do. I was just going to move the reviewing the annual report onto the agenda. And then our relationship with other guilds and the badges seems like a good thing. So over to you, Roland.
That sounds good to me. I'm curious to see, from a moment where we thought there was nothing much to talk about, I'm curious to see if we can get through all three of these items. Okay, so one more whip round, because I think your practice is a good one, Ben. Actually, let's popcorn this one. If there's anything that either of you would like to add, speak now.
The only thing I want to add is I feel like this is a great use of time, and whatever we get through, it's all kind of prep work. Like the nice thing is that we don't have to hit a decision by the end of the meeting, so we can actually just do kind of spirit of gathering considerations.
Cool.
And it seems to me that on these kind of topics, maybe not the report, but the other topics, that it is the continuing conversation that is necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of the oral tradition part. Well, if it's okay, then I'm going to open up the annual report. And since I was the one who did the editing, the collating, I will go through it. And, the one thing I added, we talked about our accomplishments together, but then I also went through the Asana list. It may be not complete because there are oftentimes a task will get added and it won't get assigned to the guild. It'll just be in the coordination circle project. But we got 68 tasks done, and a lot of them were really clustered around getting the big milestones done, and then other things. And then our lessons learned, oops. So reminders, and we talked about how meeting notes and cleaning them up can be one of the reminders, how badges is another form of reminder. And the sort of picking up on when reminders are valuable. And actually, I think this goes back to kind of our prime responsibility and the Vibe Watcher oral tradition is kind of Heartwork has a core function in offering those reminders around the agreements. So that was one category. We had some conversation around how to support people taking on responsibilities. Again, badges and skills were useful. Finding ways of recognizing growth, noticing strengths and supports woven in. And weaving that into our seasonal reviews. So looking at how we use our ongoing habits to develop supportive circumstances, and then sort of an open question about how do people take on responsibilities and accountability. And then we talked a little bit about seasonal thinking and how it's kind of more than quarterly, and that it's part of the AIM Act Reflect the fractal nature of the AIM Act Reflect, the both and quality, that it's lets us work on what isn't working, but also recognize what is, get us focused on what's the most valuable use of our time. And it's a good, and that those check-in points are a good place for personal reflection and interpersonal information. Some of the ways our thinking has shifted. We're getting more refined about what each of the guilds do, recognizing the fuzzy boundaries, and that the line, it's helpful to have a line, but it's a dotted line. And, sort of thinking about the Venn diagram and the scatter plot, and the different ways of visualizing those relationships. And then actually getting into our later agenda topic. So we talked about outreach. We really think of as the communication stuff, managing connections with organizations and individuals that aren't quite in the organization, allies on the boundaries. Heartwork is about how we work together. So it's about the agreements, keeping the agreements alive and functioning. And it's the content that happens from the process of the practices. So it's how we draw out material from the ongoing conversations. And the Curiosity Guild / Research Guild, we're still feeling out, but we were thinking maybe it's about testing better ways of doing things. So yeah, Heartwork is about how we do things together, and Curiosities / Research is about trying out new ideas, maybe testing out new ideas. And then some ideas we had about next steps, asking the other guilds how they sort of checking in with the other guilds about agreements. And we have a question for ourselves about what we would do with that. And then the ability or the need to list the responsibilities of the caretaker, and this sort of gets back to our badges and skills. And then the relationship between circle keeping and sociocracy, sort of I guess that's sort of at the boundary between the agreements and the spiritual experiment. How do we make sure that we're creating the space, but then also translating it into something practical? So anyhow, that is what was written. And the only thing I think that's missing from the requirements of the guild reports, as written in our agreements, is looking at impacts that we've had. I think we haven't really talked about how are we contributing to the social benefits that we're trying to create. So that's a gap, I think. Anyhow, so that's my summary of things. Should I just pass over to you, Roland, or pass back to April as this start? Oh, you're muted.
Well, I guess we might as well just start the circle. So over to April.
Um, okay, so we've got the report with the exception of what Ben talked about. Do we want to discuss that bit, the lacking part of the report, or do we want to move somewhere else?
For me, I think this kind of is the report, so we can actually make amendments to it, and I think we can just go around and almost like gathering consideration style. We can just, what's on your mind, and in terms of the impact, um, it might be worth thinking through a little bit, but we're also in that kind of peculiar period where we're still kind of
Yeah.
putting our infrastructure together. So some of our impact is going to be limited, but we can still talk about where that impact would be.
I think it would be interesting too. I mean, we could talk internally within the guild where we think we've impacted ourselves and anybody else outside the guild, but it would be very interesting to hear from the other guilds how they think they've been impacted by what it is we think we're doing, which I don't understand to be part of the report, but be an interesting question, I believe. Back to Ben.
I'll pass.
I think this is a really interesting and well done um, uh, compte rendu. I don't know how to say that in English of what we've
Summary.
summary of what we've been talking about, and uh, I feel like it's also I don't have anything to add. I have no amendments that I would suggest. And I feel like it is material that we can use for the next topic in the agenda. Because, for example, looking at impacts, I think is really interesting and important, and especially with the work the two of you do together often. So that is something that would be, in my mind, part of the Curiosity Guild.
Mm,
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess, back to you, April. Anything to add?
No, just to say, I think it does belong in the Curiosity Guild. And I do think that, I mean, being able to talk about impacts is useful, but it sometimes takes a little priming of the pump to kind of get the flow going. And certainly, I mean, in terms of impacts in the bit that Ben added to the report about the number of meetings, number of achievements or whatever, that quantifying actually is quite useful because it leads to a sense of that there's been a continuity and a continued effort towards things, and that we have taken it seriously, I guess. Because if we didn't have a number of meetings and a number of other things to report under that category, then we'd have to be asking ourselves, why are we spending time doing this? And is the whole system working? But I think that we're getting an indicator that the whole system is working with that sort of quantifying of things. Other, I mean, I find it most easy to report on personal impacts of being in this guild rather than anything larger, except to say that we seem to be able to use sociocracy and to work together and to feel that we kind of ride a wave together and that something happens as a result of that wave that wouldn't happen otherwise. So it's not quite magic, but it sometimes feels like it's magic. I know that for sure in terms of an impact. So I guess the way of working is and the fact that it does work is an impact in itself too. Overman.
Mhm. I think that's a great, and that's how I coach people on developing criteria, developing outcome indicators, is go into your personal experience and think about what felt like it was important, what felt like a success. And then you can start to quantify that or, look for more examples of it. But going into the personal experience of what feels valuable is a really good place to start. And the other thought I had is that part of that could be reviewing the overall goals, the social benefits for the Lifeboat Academy and saying, because there's some of the social benefit, like we're not sequestering carbon, right? This guild will never have an impact on carbon sequestration, but that's one of our goals of Lifeboat Academy goals. And so being able to kind of go and say these are the impacts are the sort of the social benefit categories where we think we can have some benefits would be kind of interesting. Back to you, Roland.
I think I'm just going to be paraphrasing more or less. It occurs to me that measuring impact is actually part of our description. It's part of what we say we're going to do for the people who, whatever we're calling them now, the benefactors and the caretakers and the community members. One of the ways that because we are the whatever investment, either material, monetary, or physical or mental, whatever the investment is, we say that we will be repaying interest in the form of social benefits, and to be able to show that there is social benefit, we have to be able to measure it. So measuring impact, in fact, makes sense that we include it in the way that we do things, because from the very beginning, we've said that we wanted to be able to report on that. So I think we're coming back, and this is part of the power of remembering and of repeating and of revisiting, is that we're remembering things that we've already talked about sometimes ad nauseum, and like, oh yeah, that's where we're at. And I'm going to pass to April.
Well, I have two ideas, Patchy. First of all, is to give a point of recognition to Roland, who very often has pulled me back to what we're actually talking about when I've sort of left the room with a sort of some sort of fantasy going on about where I think this is going and all the other things I'm thinking about. So just an appreciation for that. And the second thing is it not possible, even during our meetings, to be where we are located in our place-based part? Cannot we? Can we not be sequestering carbon anyway? Like if I had a house plant that accompanied me during these meetings, and it was a useful carbon sequestering kind of a house plant, couldn't I like have that on the desk beside me as part of the session, to keep in mind that carbon sequestration, whatever
Sequestration.
is incredibly important, and that's one of the big points of all of this. It could act like a reminder and a what do you call it, that helps you remember stuff.
Mnemonic device.
That's the one. So I'm going to think about that for my own table here that I'm operating from, and seeing if I can't figure out what is the highest carbon sequestration output I can get from what it is that I have around me to help me keep on that path, I guess. Over to Ben.
My response is let chickens be chickens, and which is this is old shorthand, but it has to do with regenerative principles. And we don't have to be all things to all people, and that's part of the beauty of sociocracy. We don't have to worry about carbon sequestration in this circle. I think it's a lovely and charm. There's an element in which it is embodying the agreements about, sort of the fractal nature of it, and we're all in this together. So I like it from a poetic standpoint, but from an impact standpoint, I'm not at all interested in Heartwork being able to produce the other thing too is carbon sequestration is hard to do and hard to measure, and let's not put that burden on ourselves. But anyhow, I feel like this is all good stuff, and I'm ready to move on. I think over to you, Roland.
Yeah, I am too. And just to say that these are the kinds of things. So how much your house plant is sequestering or not, because it might not be, it might actually be emitting carbon, is something to maybe mention to what other guild, would be dealing with that. So probably the Farm Guild. So giving them a suggestion. We were just talking about this in our guild, and this is your strength. So here's an idea, and then they can decide what they want to do with it. In the same way that I just sort of passed the buck about impacts, measuring impacts to the Curiosity Guild. Okay, so it sounds like we are agreed to move on to the next agenda item. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Okie dokie. And that would be our relationship with other guilds. So to start the circle, would you launch us in this discussion, April, please?
Yes, well, our relationship with other guilds, we've just actually been talking about not 2 minutes ago, in two different ways, for two different guilds probably. So knowing when to draw the line, I guess, and knowing what belongs to which guilds that we don't have to worry about. We could acknowledge but not worry about, which Ben just spoke to. So figuring out that, for me, it helps me able to ask questions of other people. What do you think about, like, is this or this or this or whatever? It becomes clear to me when I get that social reflection from other folks. Other than that, I think I would be really interested in hearing from other guilds as to what they would see as our responsibilities in recognizing them. How would the Farm and Food Guild know that us, the Heartwork&Philosophy Guild, has been considering that guild as neighbors, as collaborators, as whatever? What would tell you that we were doing that we were thinking about our relationship, and that we were taking steps to put in place what we said we believed or knew about the guild in a way. So really it's about how are other guilds going to know that we're trying to be in relationship with them, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Over to bed.
And the short answer to that is the coordination circle.
Okay.
That is, meant to be the perennial location for ideas getting passed along, which doesn't mean that they can't get passed along, informally. Caretakers are always the point people. So things can always, like the carbon sequestration in houseplants, could always just be a note, hey, by the way. And yeah, I think it's really so. I'm just thinking back to the conversation about impacts, and it's sort of I guess partly it's the asking the question, who's responsible, like getting in the habit of saying whose responsibility is this?
Yeah.
And it could be well, this is clearly outreach. This is clearly us. This could be us or them. There's sort of like the three categories. It's like, well, with any of them, in any two-way relationship, there are three options. It's
Right.
theirs, it's ours, or we're not sure. Or it's shared. It could easily be the thing. So I think there's partly I'm gonna say, yeah, there's a value in a a habit of ask part of our relationship with other guilds. Actually, you know what? I think I'm actually paraphrasing what April just said, but that question is a question that we just all guilds should be asking is how do we know whose responsibility is this, and are we sure we're not taking on somebody else's responsibility or shirking our own?
Yeah.
So yeah. Over to you, Roland.
And just to add to that, I agree. And add to that is a lot along the same lines of knowing where to draw the line is recognizing that we're all circle keepers.
Yeah.
So it's not that anyone else has the answer, and it's
No.
not it's not someone sort of someone is supposed to be flagging certain things that we're all responsible. So that's my 5 cents. Back to you, April.
Is there a time besides the charrette when all the guilds get together? I mean, outside of the coordination circle, is there an actual time when uh, even representatives of all the guilds get together?
Well, that is the coordination circle. So I don't know what would you want outside of that time? Are you thinking about more of a social time?
I'm thinking about more of a social time, a rubbing shoulders time, and a knowing each other time, knowing each other as guild members, but outside of the actual function of of the coordination circle, which I sort of get, um, and which seems to work, and where you get guild reports. But that's different than sort of standing next to another guild member from another guild that you don't know and that you have not worked beside shoulder to shoulder necessarily. Anyway, that's maybe just a question for the moment. Over to Ben.
Oh, to me? Okay. Um, well, in part, I think that's part of our job of heart work, I think. Um, because I am thinking, well, that's part of the reason why we have Connect the Dots Club.
Yeah.
And it may be that there would be, and Ronnie's been talking about, the cocktail party, ice cream social. So yeah, that does feel like, the sociable get to know you kinds of activities feels um it feels like a heart work responsibility to me.
Yeah.
I'll pass over to Roland.
So are we talking about um, sort of guild focused activities, or are we talking just in general the people who are part of the Lifeboat Academy and who happen to be guild members getting to know each other? Because that seems like two very different things. So there's the how, yeah. So there is a question for you. Over
Yeah.
you, April.
yeah, there is a difference between those two. And you don't want to be setting up an us and them kind of thing. I'm a guild member, so like I count more than you. You're just a lifeboat builder, and I don't know you, kind of thing. And is it guild or intra-guild focused work? Because the guild focus probably only happens within one guild, right? Over to Ben.
Oh yeah, and that's, my take on this is that that would happen when there are shared projects between guilds
Right.
or subcircles that get formed that work on overlapping issues. So just in the normal course of events, that kind of work oriented, which I think is really valuable. I mean, I am a bigger proponent of that way of getting to know each other than of sociable time,
Yeah,
because I think there's limits to that. Um, but I think this is a really good distinction in sort of thinking, keeping in mind, what are the different aspects of how we want people to, and I think it's also, I'm going to add in another thing here, which is there's something about all we can do is create opportunities.
yeah,
We can't force people to get to know each other. We can't force people to take on the opportunities. We can just sort of figure out where, and in an experimental way, we might offer some opportunities and nobody else is interested in that. And then that's feedback we've got to use. So yeah, over to you, Roland.
Uh, yeah. So I was thinking about also the different ways in which we can relate, because there is that the Lifeboat Academy and Lifeboat Builders is distributed across the planet. And then there is the farm on Spalding Road, which is local. There is the Seashelt Enclave, which is also local. There is the Texas group, which is so there are different ways in which we are connected and working together. And different ways in which to get involved and to get to know each other. I thought it was interesting at I think it was at a Connect the Dots Club that a member a participant was interested enough in the other people in the group that they asked how to get in touch, how they can communicate with other people outside
Mhm.
of of the gathering to get to know them. So that's interesting. I was also thinking about uh, noticing, because we were talking about engagement and involvement, and noticing when somebody is very engaged and always present, or someone who is dropping off and dropping away. What is there something to do with that data? Uh,
Mm.
Either in terms of retention of the individual, or what's working for the person who's very involved, or retention of other people coming, is there something that we're missing that so and that feels like a hard work. Well, actually, and this is where the Venn diagram comes in, Heartwork and Curiosity Guild. um like gathering the data, what to do with the data, that kind of thing. On a heart, it's sort of like, what do we do with the data for the Heartwork Guild might be where the Curiosity Guild comes in. Anyway, at this point it's all sort of academic, because you know we're all part of both, so uh yeah. anyway, those are the things that I'm thinking of, that I was thinking about over to April.
It's good to speculate on all the different social spheres and ways of sort of rubbing into each other's universes, I guess, because before long it will not be academic, which tends to be the way that stuff develops around the whole thing, the Lifeboat Academy, the farm, the whatever, all the outreach, the networks, is that we start stuff off with a beginning structure and sort of go, oh, what if nobody else does, how will we know? And then we become more certain over time and stuff happens because of the process, right? And we're getting smart enough to pick up on the indicators of the inflection points, I guess, and to trust that. And then all of a sudden it's not academic. It might be tentative and it might not be really substantial yet, but it's happening. It's practical. And that's one of the good things that happens. That's one of the impacts that happens, and it's one thing I look for in anything that I'm joining in. It's one of my indicators. And I've forgotten what that all accrues to, but on to Ben.
Yeah, well, and I agree. And like I'm thinking about just letting this conversation kind of bounce around a little bit. The curiosity, because, bringing us back to the original question here is what's our relationship to other guilds? And then talking about the impact that we're having, and actually one of these things so thinking about who comes in and gets strongly engaged, or who comes and goes, seems on the edge. That's also for me an interesting conversation around outreach as a responsibility, which I see as getting people curious. Like that, their only job is to kind of get people to show up. And then it kind of feels like Heartwork, to a large degree, is responsible for getting them engaged, or, enhancing, facilitating engagement once people have expressed interest. There's a fuzzy line there, but there's also a difference between how do you pique somebody's curiosity and get them to show up the first time? That's a whole skill set. Versus once they show up, how do you then attend to what they need? And then the Curiosity Guild, as a support service, it's almost like it's a helper circle for all of the other guilds to say, well, here's how we could take a look at that. Here's how we could actually track that and use it, and what would be practical. So, and I agree. I think, and it's also naming those, when you can put a label on it, when you can put a handle on it, you can work with it more easily. So it is tentative because, we can see all sorts of correlations that aren't there, and correlations, not causation, and all that kind of stuff. But you can't work with anything if it just feels like, a big mass of chaos. As opposed, it's like some people come and go, and some people really, it's like, oh, okay, well, what's behind that? And yeah, kind of trusting, having well, and I guess this is also how I think the Curiosity Guild can provide some support, like in that we're serving kind of as a mirror, that the Curiosity Guild can help all of the other guilds and the lifeboat builders clarify their own questions and, set up their own experiments. Anyhow, I'm finding this very productive and interesting. I forget, I pass back to Roland, right? And you're muted.
I don't think I have anything to add. And do we want to get back to are we still actually talking about the original purpose of this part of the agenda? And do we want to get back to it, or is this is this part of it, and do we just want to continue along this flow? Over to you, April.
I'm just watching to see if somebody's writing down where the line is between the Curiosity Guild outreach and Heartwork, because I think that's, I mean, it's a Venn diagram is building itself right there, and with the fuzzy lines. But I mean, who cares? I guess I'm starting to wonder then, okay, how do the badges and the badge system help to stabilize and build into these different areas, and how does it help to make them more impactful, to make the work within them more impactful, both within and outside of the guild? That's quite a complicated question for late in the day. That's amazing. Over to Ben.
Well, and I think that would be, I think I don't think it's as complicated as we think, because I think if you make in my mind, and I love oh, what are we calling it now? We give people tokens, so that, that there are badges and there are tokens. And I think that, if you think in terms of a grid, there are going to be skills, specific skills. And the original idea, this comes from sociocracy, which is that you need to let people know what skills are going to be used or necessary in a guild.
Right.
And some of them are kind of universal, or, like some skills you need as a caretaker, doesn't matter what guild it is. But then there are other skills that you only need in this guild or that guild. And I think that partly that also starts to define the boundaries between things. It's sort of, what are some of the skills that if you, like, this is not the guild to be in if you want to practice your copywriting. Like, we're not a copywriting guild. And outreach is not a guild primarily where you want to develop your conflict resolution skills, but this is, so anyhow, I think that the more we can, and so maybe this is a motivation to move into that next topic and see what we can do there. And over to Roland.
Okay, over to April.
So which guild is going to teach me hedging? Is that farm and food?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm building a hedge around.
Roland loves hedging. Well, dead hedging and fencing and live hedging.
Yeah. Okay, so we're moving into badges. Yeah, we did talk last time about there's an overall badge of some kind that requires a list of something to be ticked off to know that you're one of those, that you carry one of those badges. And there probably are degrees of badgeness, or there might be, I don't know, can you get a quarter badge for being part of the way there? And then also there's tokens, which are the smaller things where you notice something that is positively related to the badge, to the skills and the level of sort of structural stuff that's part of a badge. And I'm wondering, for badges, do we if I'm an apprentice and I want people to know that I'm an apprentice, is there a different badge than if I'm a novice or a tyro or a master or whatever? The different color badges, the different size badges, they have different pictures on them. Um, and can you have badges where you're an apprentice in farm and food because you're practicing your hedging, or where you think that you are more elevated somehow or experienced in, I don't know, outreach. And so you get to have that badge too. So we could walk around, I guess, displaying the badges. And if somebody looked at us, it would A, look like a patchwork, and B, you would get an indication of where people were within each guild division.
Yeah, so there are answers to those questions. So the at least there are partial answers to at least some of those questions. So in terms of the apprentice, peer, master kind of level, a badge is a badge, but the badge may be an indicator of so you accumulate a certain number of badges in a certain category to get your apprentice status, your peer status, or your master status.
Okay.
So, and the badges can be divided up. So you could have like a level 1 badge and a level 2 badge to indicate increasing levels of complexity. We've done more with the farm badges. And so, for example, and I think it provides some good examples for for the chickens, for example, there is a level of being able to identify chicken health. And then there's an advanced level of being able to respond when the chickens are not healthy.
Right.
So, there are some things where, and that's kind of an intro level badge this is how you clear out the chicken litter. This is how you sweep it and clean it and put the new stuff in. And then the next level up would be, this is noticing when the litter needs to be changed. So the first one, it's like someone tells you, go change the litter, and you do it. The other one is you start to develop some eye for when it looks good, when it's not good. And the next level up is what to do if there's a problem that's developed because the chicken litter hasn't been changed. So, but each of the badges and every badge is meant to be demonstratable so that it's not none of this is about a written or an oral exam. This is about being able to perform something and that's the direct connection between every responsibility of a guild should have a badge associated with it, because that also means the badge is the how-to for the responsibilities that the guild does. So for Heartwork, for example, if the agreement circle is part of is in our domain, then there should be a badge for leading an agreement circle. And you demonstrate that by doing it successfully. So then the badges themselves are kind of the atomic level. They can be anything from a very, very simple, this is opening the chickens in the morning, that's a badge, up to handling an emotionally charged topic in a group setting. That could be another badge. So, they're both badges, and they both come down to things that you can sort of demonstrate. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Roland.
So the badges are sort of stepped where you need certain badges to be able to move on to the next badge. And for example, the chicken health, or going from being able to clear the chicken litter to being able to, you need that badge before you can have the badge where you're dealing with an emotionally charged circle. Because if you can deal with chicken litter, you can deal with anything. So that makes me think about the token idea. And because the tokens, how do they relate to actually getting a badge? And I think that there is a relationship between the two. Because at first I was thinking, well, you get a certain amount of tokens, then you get your badge. But then I was thinking, if we've got somebody new comes in and someone has a crush on them, and they'll just give them all of their tokens because they want to be liked. Or, there are people who have certain levels of experience, but not a full-on level of experience. Can they give a token towards a badge or not? And then I was thinking, well, maybe it could be that if we do use the token idea, that there are a certain amount of tokens that go towards the awarding of a badge, but then there's also a certain amount of there is there some sort of control before being awarded the badge, a peer or a master, or a little muddy on the terms that we're using, but someone who is recognized as having the appropriate knowledge to be able to say, yes, you now get this badge. So you need a certain amount of tokens towards a badge, but that ultimately the awarding of the badge is because of X, Y, or Z. Um, yeah. So over to April.
Well, now I'm curious as to how you get the badge for handling an emotionally charged chicken. Are there cross skills?
Well, as an expert in the field, and as an expert in the field, and also as the engagement expert, I think I would nominate you for tackling that question.
I need to make that question clear, or to make the implications of that question clearer.
No answers. Answers.
Oh, I don't do answers. They're too emotionally charged. Um, I like all of your considerations. There's lots of considerations of how to do that, and there's lots of different systems of doing this, and we need to do the one that does not make people hark back to their school life where they were given or not given gold stars or red stars or blue stars or any stars at all. But at the same time, that realistically depicts what it is that people are able to do in their capacity, and whether some general agreement that that depiction is accurate and is meaningful. Because that's what will keep the engagement really alive, I think, and make it realistic in a community sense. When we started talking about badges, I initially thought that each guild would just have a badge. It was sort of like a picture of what the guild was. It was kind of like, archaic pub signs in Europe, where they all have a meaning, and the image and the name harks to something that is of meaning in the community. And they're also nice to look at. And they signify that you can get food, shelter, and drink there. That's what I had in mind for a badge. I kind of was thinking, oh, we'll just hang those on each guild. But this is not just a depiction of what the guild is about. And remembering that every responsibility has a badge has really helped me to understand what this really is. And I'm getting the feeling that we're almost at the point where we could start putting something down in checklists or grids or diagrams of some kind, to show the different dimensions of this. And if we have the list of responsibilities of going to each guild, then that's a starting place, I think. Over to Ben.
Mhm. Yeah, I think for sure, like I got clear a couple weeks ago. I can't remember, something prompted it, probably the bylaws. Oh, it was the bylaws, thinking about, because um part of the bylaws, or actually the operating agreements are about role selections. And we have, we started with caretaker in part because there were so few of us, we didn't want to spread it out too much but thinking about the different roles, I realized we rolled up a bunch of, sorry for the double entendre, but we combined a number of roles into the caretaker role, which you can extract. So there is a convener role, which is scheduling the meeting, and I started to like, there's specific tasks. Convener sets the time for the meeting. So they're the one, if we have to reschedule something, convener does that. And the other thing they do is send out reminders so that everyone knows when the meeting is happening. And then there is the meeting facilitator who gathers the agenda and makes sure that we go through the agenda and keeps everyone on track. And there's gathering the agenda, leading this, leading the elements of the meeting. And there's a record keeper who is both responsible for during the meeting and then cleaning up the notes after the meeting or being able to point to where things are.
Yeah.
And there's some, specific things. So it's like, it really is, you start to like factor out, there are a few key things. There are all of these micro tasks, and then you can just start to kind of glom them together and say, these tasks go with this role, or these tasks go in this guild subset or whatever. There's tasks about how to do the newsletter, how to send out a group email, how to, and so I feel like, and the other thing I was thinking about is this also means there's a connection between the badges and the impact,
Yes.
because we're talking about things that are observable and important and lead to something. So that also means that the badges will be a good indicator of like, here is how we are, like how to identify what are the things that go into facilitating an emotionally charged meeting. Well, those are also going to be things that, a skillful person will avoid escalation. A skillful person will avoid somebody leaving and, exiting the organization. So like the more we get into it, I think the easier it'll be to just kind of say anything we talk about, we can say, well, let's break that down. What's involved in being a circle keeper. There's a couple skills, and anyhow, I think I'm excited, and I am seeing that we're kind of getting close to time, but I do feel like this has been useful in terms of like kind of setting the foundation. So over to you, Roland.
Yeah, I think I would vote for I feel like I have contributed everything that I feel like I can for the time being. And I would be, and I'm looking at time and we're at an hour and 15 minutes. The one consideration that I think I'd want to carry over to the next meeting, if it is a consideration at all, is in terms of the awarding of badges, that it is done in a way where it's not a detriment to the overall health of the organization or the farm. So it's not just giving out badges for the sake of giving out badges, but it really is that I know that I can go to this person for information that I don't have because they've got this badge, and that they will be able to help me and not not. So that's the my final consideration of the day, I think. Over to April.
Yeah, I think that's a really important consideration too. And I agree, I'm coming to the end of my creative flourishes. And it feels like that we have fleshed out this whole conceptual thing that's been floating around for at least a year. And I think it would be really interesting to take these considerations to the charrette as well.
Mhm.
in some way. And we may have moved on with them by that time, but I can remember other charrettes where we invited people to produce badges and nobody did. And now here we've got a whole bunch of stuff on badginess. So we're primed to be becoming very practical about it, I believe. Over to Ben.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that just makes me think, what's the prep work?
Yeah.
And I do feel like I think Roland, you brought up some great points around the tokens and both of you around the tokens and the usefulness of it and being aware of the shadow, like that it doesn't become a popularity contest, that there is some rigor behind it so that we actually know if you're earning, because, and I think that it's the both and, because I want this to be fun. I think we haven't said it here. I think we've said it before, though. It becomes a way of celebrating successes and
Yes.
and mutual support, like peer-to-peer support by, encouraging recognition. And that's great, but I don't want it to get carried away so that it's so silly that there's not some discernment in there, that there's actually some recognition, you know, that like Roland was saying that, I want to know that if somebody has a chicken badge, I can ask them about the chickens and they're going to know what they're talking about and they're not going to put the chickens at risk, so yeah, so I think I think I'm agreed, and it's sort of it feels to me like the next step in this is how do we pull this together? What's the prep work so that we have a good foundation so that at the charrette we can take this to the next stage and it actually becomes something that we implement next year. Which I think is totally doable, especially in a, kind of version 1.0 kind of way. So I think I'm saying I'm good, and I'm hearing other people saying they're good to move on. So I'm moving on to Roland.
Any final words on this topic? Shut them out now. All right. So
We need the Jeopardy music. Or countdown.
countdown.
Yeah.
Boom.
Oh,
Okay, so what's the next thing on our agenda?
That's the last thing on our agenda. Unless
Oh,
action items, are there any
yep.
action items that we want to pull from the meeting?
I think we could start structuring something like lists or grids or whatever to start to put things to sort stuff into
Mm-hmm.
the right areas.
I can go look for what we've done already and bring that together and send it out so that we can individually have a look to see what recommendations or what changes or observations that from that.
That seems good to me. Yeah, that seems great to me. I don't think we need to do anything with our conversation about relationships to other guilds, because I think that is really will lead into the charrette part.
Yeah.
So I don't have any action items to add, and thanks for Roland for taking that on. Back, I guess over to April, just because, yeah, over to April.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that, but thank you again, Roland. This is good. Good stuff. And I'm ready to stop now. Put it into the hopper in my head and wander around cooking my dinner. So.
And okay, so as checkout, now that we've been together for almost an hour and a half, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes again, and one word for one color, and at the count of three, open your eyes, and we'll do a round to share the one word for the color. 1, 2, 3.
For go
Oh.
to.
Over to April.
A color, right? Bluey green. Over to Ben. I'm stuck.
Beige.
2 words. Sorry. Ben.
Yeah, beige. Over to Roland.
Sort of some sort of warm tone. That wasn't a word. I broke my own rule. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm colorblind, so I'm excused. All right. Have a lovely evening, have a lovely dinner, and especially you, Ben, I hope you have a lovely dinner because it's an
Me too.
experiment. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Great.
And
Thank
bye.
you, guys. Bye-bye.